Hello everyone, and welcome back to Isaiah from Mormons. We're going to be doing chapter 21 this week, 2 Nephi 21, which is Isaiah 11. But, once again, we have to talk about the chapter itself. Sometimes, some chapter divisions are better than others. 2 Nephi 21 is not one of the others. It's pretty bad. Almost literally the middle of a sentence. So we have to go back and talk a little bit about what we were talking about last time, then jump into 21. So you may recall from last time we were talking about some of the Assyrian issues and looking at the Assyrians like a forest fire. That's kind of the image in this chapter. Chapter 20, 2 Nephi 20, which is Isaiah 10. And he says, "And he shall cut down the thickets of the forest with iron, and Lebanon shall fall by a mighty one." 33, right before that, it says, "Behold, the Lord of hosts shall lop the bough with terror, and the high ones of stature shall be hewn down, and the haughty shall be humbled." Right, so the Assyrians are this big forest fire. He's going to flood them out, but also he's going to cut down all the trees so it doesn't have fuel. That's the image, right? But who's he cutting down? He's going to cut down the king of Assyria, but he's also going to cut down the Judahites themselves. He's going to humble those of Judah because of their sort of arrogance. And that becomes clear only when you read the next verse, which is 2 Nephi 21, the beginning of Isaiah 11. By the way, there is not really much change here between Isaiah and the Book of Mormon at this time. Last chapter there were a few changes. This chapter there are almost no changes. So, I mean, it really just depends on the chapter. So, anyway, that's what we're looking at this time. This chapter is interesting because it has a lot of eschatological stuff, and it helps to explain why this speech kind of fits into this part of Isaiah. He's dealing with a lot of the social justice issues. And there's some really fantastic stuff, eschatological stuff, sort of last days, second coming kind of stuff. But also there's a lot of stuff that, of course, applies to things that are going to happen in his own time. So anyway, we'll just jump right into it. So here in 2 Nephi 21, with the background of the forest being cut down, he says, "And there shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord. And shall make him of quick understanding in the fear of the Lord. And he shall not judge after the sight of his eyes, neither reprove after the hearing of his ears. But with righteousness shall he judge the poor, and reprove with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall smite the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips shall he slay the wicked. And righteousness shall be the girdle of his loins, and faithfulness the girdle of his reins. The wolf also shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid, and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them." So here, the forest has been cut down, and then out of the cleared trees, a rod shall come forth out of the stem of Jesse. So, and when you cut down trees, there's sort of this stump left. And he says, even when everything's been cut down, growth is going to come out of that stump. So he's running with that image. So a rod shall come forth out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. And this is actually very interesting in light of section 113 of the Doctrine and Covenants. We very rarely get sort of question-answer sessions with the Lord about passages of Scripture. This is one chapter where we do actually get a question-answer session. So I'd like to talk a little bit about kind of what it means in his own time, and then jump to the Doctrine and Covenants and talk about what it means eschatologically, because we actually get that. God actually tells Joseph Smith exactly what the other meaning of this is, which is really fantastic. So the images that you have, the trees cut down, and then you have this new growth coming out of it. A rod is coming out of the stump of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. When you look at olive trees, for example, but other trees do this too, a lot of times the root will grow a distance away, and then a whole new little tree kind of will grow out of the root. in a place that you didn't necessarily expect. When it says a branch will grow out of his roots, when you look at those words and how they're used in other parts of the Old Testament, that seems to be the image. And why Jesse, a rod out of the stem of Jesse? Jesse is David's dad. You may recall the story when Samuel goes to pick a new king in 1 Samuel 16, if I remember correctly. He talks to Jesse, and says, hey, I'm supposed to pick one of your sons to be the king. He goes through all the sons, and the smallest one was King David, and David turns out to be the one that's supposed to be the king. So when he says stem of Jesse, I think he's referring to this royal line, that when he sort of humbled Judah and sort of lopped everything off, something is going to come out of the royal line. Now, when Ahaz hears this, who's still talking to, by the way, this is all part of the big sermon we've been doing all the way back. I think it started in chapter 7. We'll just keep on keeping on with that. So when the king hears that, I think he's thinking, well, there's going to be another king from the same line. And after everything's been humbled, this king is going to rise up. And that's a good interpretation. But, like we'll get to later, there's another interpretation. So there's this king. He comes eventually from Jesse via David. Comes through the royal line, and he's going to arise after everything's been destroyed and after Judah has been humbled. And then we hear about this king. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord. All of these, wisdom, understanding, counsel, being a good counselor, being mighty, having knowledge and having fear of the Lord, all of these things are things that you would want out of a good king. So more of this idea of there's going to be a really good king and he's going to do exactly what you want a king to do. And in some ways, post-destruction or near destruction of Jerusalem, Hezekiah fits this bill pretty well. And actually for a lot of his reign, Hezekiah is pretty good. Isaiah is going to kind of poke fun at Hezekiah periodically and kind of prod him in a better direction, but Hezekiah really is a pretty fantastic king, and on a much smaller scale, he fits this bill, and Isaiah may be referring to him. Obviously, he's also referring to somebody else, but on a very basic level, he may also be referring to Hezekiah. In verse 3 it says, and shall make him of quick understanding in the fear of the Lord. By the way, fear of the Lord, this is like respect for the Lord. And another issue in Hebrew, I should just note this. Sometimes when it says fear, the word for fear and the word for sight are very close to each other. And sometimes you can imagine when you're dictating a text and somebody else is writing it down, you're going to make small mistakes. Sometimes I think that might be a mistake that we see. I don't know if it's necessarily always supposed to be fear. When it says fear in the scriptures, I think sometimes it may be the sight of the Lord or the seeing of the Lord. Later, Jews didn't think that you could see God. And so whenever people see God in the scriptures, they're very uncomfortable with it. They kind of try to cover up. So all you have to do is change the way the dots are put in, the voweling. I may have mentioned this. The Hebrew has no vowels. The vowels aren't put in until 1000 AD or thereabouts, somewhere around there. And so that obviously can cause some problems, and it just takes a couple of dots to take it from fear of the Lord to seeing the Lord. So this could be the spirit of knowledge and of seeing the Lord, or in the sight, and of seeing the Lord. But they would want to change that, because seeing would make sense in light of the next verse. He talks about seeing after the sight of his eyes. But they may have wanted to change that. So just know that might actually be seeing. But either way, seeing or fearing, the idea of fear is really respect. Spirit of knowledge and respect for the Lord. Not fear necessarily in the way that we would think of it, I don't think. So in verse 3 it says, and so he's going to have all these great kingly attributes in verse 2. In verse 3 it says, and he shall make him of quick understanding in the fear of the Lord, or in the sight of the Lord perhaps. And he shall not judge after the sight of his eyes, neither reprove after the hearing of his ears. But with righteousness shall he judge the poor, and reprove with equity for the meek of the earth. So, in other words, he's not going to just judge based on what he sees himself. He's not going to, because judge and reprove here both have courtroom connotations. So when the king sits as judge, he's not going to judge based on just what he sees or what he hears. He's going to judge with righteousness. And that idea of righteousness, I think, he's going to do it within the fear of the Lord, like it's been saying. He's going to judge via the Spirit, not with what he sees or what he hears. He's going to judge righteously via the Spirit. But with righteousness shall I judge the poor, and reprove with equity for the meek of the earth. Because obviously, if you don't take bribes, which is one thing Isaiah's been talking about the whole time, right? If you don't take bribes, then you judge the poor with righteousness, because you don't need a payoff. You pass proper judgment on the lowly or meek of the earth. Why? Because if you're not taking bribes, then you're going to judge the poor and the rich the same, right? So I think that's another little dig at the current system. Reprove with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall smite the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips shall he slay the wicked. So this idea of dispensing judgment, and then the judgment he dispenses is so powerful that everything just kind of obeys him as king. I think that's what we're seeing. He smites the earth with the rod of his mouth, his judgments that he speaks as king. With the breath of his lips shall he slay the wicked. But once again, Isaiah is laying it on really thick here for just a regular king, right? Kind of interesting, and we'll get back to that in a second. And righteousness shall be the girdle of his loins, and faithfulness the girdle of his reins. Unfortunately, that is a comparatively uncommon thing. Even today, we still sometimes have issues with this. That does mean exactly what you think it means. Righteousness shall be the girdle of his loins, and faithfulness the girdle of his reins. Both of those have very strong sexual connotations. Okay, in other words, he's going to keep his pants on. I think that's parallelism that effectively means that righteousness and faithfulness are going to be how he lives. Because along with taking bribes, obviously there are major issues with people in authority, guys like kings and judges, issues with rape and sexual abuse and stuff like that. That kind of thing was very common. Maybe a little bit of a dig at David here. So he's saying, no, we're not going to have any of that with this king. He's even going to be above that, which is, unfortunately, that's pretty high praise for the time. The wolf also shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid, and the calf and the young lion and fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. Now this is seems pretty straightforward, seems pretty eschatological, and I think it is eschatological. I think this is actually a realistic depiction of the last days, because we know that eventually we're going to kind of go back to this sort of Garden of Eden state, right? Garden of Eden, the animals kind of get along, and I think that's what we're looking at here. He's throwing back to the Garden of Eden, where eventually it is going to be like that, in a quite literal sense. But there's another sense in which this is fulfilled, and I'm going to read a little bit more and try to make sense of some of this here. The wolf also shall dwell with the lamb, the leopard shall lie down with the kid, and the calf and the young lion and fatling together, and the little child shall lead them. And then we have this. And the cow and the bear shall feed, their young ones shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. And the sucking child shall play on the hole of the asp, and the weaned child shall put his hand on the cockatrice's den. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Now, once again, for an earthly king, Isaiah is laying it on pretty thick, right? But I think here the idea is Judah is just this little tiny country at the time, surrounded by giant neighbors that could destroy him instantly. And that actually, I think, is the image that we get here. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb. The Assyrians, this big, crazy wolf, is gonna coexist with this dainty little lamb whose neck could be instantly broken, right? The wolf could tear him to bits, but he's not going to. The leopard shall lie down with the kid, a big angry cat, that kills everything. He's going to lie down with a little tiny goat. The calf and the young lion and the fatling together. Fatlings are often rams, especially fed, fattened up rams, as you can guess by the name. And a little child shall lead them. Right? So the idea of Judah, this little country, surrounded by these big terrible neighbors, but the big terrible neighbors are not going to be so terrible anymore. They're going to finally get along under this king who is so righteous, right? And the cow and the bear shall feed, their young ones shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The sucking child shall play on the hole of the asp, and the weaned child shall put his hand on the cockatrice's den. So a little tiny baby, right? Who's still breastfeeding. He's gonna play on the hole of the asp, but that may be viper. It's a little bit difficult to say. Both of these are different kinds of snakes, asp and cockatrice. It's hard to say which is which. Probably, a viper and then some other kind of snake. It seems like here. And the slightly older child will put his hand on the cockatrice's den. So, you've got this little country, and he has all these enemies surrounding him, but it's not going to be an issue for him. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, but the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Now, once again, you're getting this idea that is reflected in chapters 1 and 2. They shall not hurt nor destroy. Really, I would say they won't damage or vandalize or ruin things. That's what I would say for those phrases. In all my holy mountain. Once again, he's talking about how all of Judah and Jerusalem are going to be consecrated to the Lord. Okay, so all my holy mountain, all of the city of Jerusalem is going to be consecrated to the Lord. Thus, his holy mountain. All of Jerusalem is going to be like a temple. And they aren't going to hurt or destroy. And how is this kind of unbelievable transformation going to happen? For the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Now this goes back to the last chapter. He's talking about he's going to flood out the Assyrians, right? To sort of stop this fire. Well, he's going to flood it with righteousness, and he's going to flood it here in 9 with the knowledge of the Lord, just as the waters cover the area that becomes the sea, obviously because it is covered with water. So it will be with the knowledge of the Lord. Everybody is going to know about the Lord. And so you're going to have this experience where you aren't going to have all these national differences. Why? Because everybody's going to worship the Lord. Now that's a theme that shows up over and over again in Isaiah. Once everybody worships the Lord, all these national differences are not going to cause you any problems anymore. And that's what we're looking at here, is this idea that all of Jerusalem is going to be holy. Everybody's going to worship the Lord. And suddenly, everybody's going to be friends. But now let's jump really quick to the Doctrine and Covenants. Doctrine and Covenants, section 113. Now, we've been talking about this in the context of a really good king that's going to come. And he's going to do all these great things. And that's true, right out of the stem of Jesse, right? But this has also another meaning. Just like you're going to have this great king who does all the great kingly things that you're supposed to do, and to a lesser degree Hezekiah is going to fulfill this, who's the one that's really going to fulfill this? It's Jesus, right? And Doctrine and Covenants 113 says just that. Doctrine and Covenants 113 verse 1 says, "Who is the stem of Jesse spoken of in the 1st through 5th verses of the 11th chapter of Isaiah? Verily thus saith the Lord, it is Christ." So, this king who's going to judge always righteously, and he's not going to reprove after the side of his, reprove after the hearing of his ears, or judge after the sight of his eyes. He's going to not take bribes. He's going to smite the earth with the rod of his mouth. Like I said, for a regular king, Isaiah is laying it on pretty thick, and that's because, it does kind of apply to Hezekiah, but it also definitely applies to Jesus, right? Who's really going to actually fulfill this all the way. He's the one who's going to usher in this kind of eschatological kingdom. Who never takes bribes. He's always very just with everybody. He treats everybody the way they're supposed to be treated. He never abuses anybody. And then here in 6 through 9, we see, the wolf should dwell with the lamb. We saw that in a political sense. But when Jesus comes, comes, that's going to be pretty literal. You're going to have a situation where you just don't have problems anymore like you used to have. There's a very millennial feeling here, and I think that's definitely what we're looking at here. Is there is going to be this kind of great age that's ushered in the millennium. Things are going to be really great. They're going to be about like Isaiah is saying here. When you look in the Gospel Principles Manual, that's one of the things that they talk about is that things are going to be pretty good. Yeah, you're still going to have people are still going to have stuff to do, obviously, but things are going to be much better. And once again, this kind of harkens back to the Garden of Eden imagery, sort of pre-fall imagery when there's no animosity between the animals. And that idea of sort of a Garden of Eden state, I think, is pretty apt. That everybody's going to know about the Lord. And really, frankly, this can only happen in an eschatological setting. People are only really going to know about the Lord, everybody, um, you know, or around the time of the second coming, honestly. We're going to do a lot here before the second coming to preach the gospel. But it's going to be right around that time, once everybody's at least gotten the opportunity, then the second coming is going to happen. At least that seems pretty clear to me from the Gospel Principles Manual. So it looks like that's the other thing we're looking here. So Isaiah is talking about in his time, people are going to know about the Lord, and that's going to bring peace, sure, but also this is going to happen on a much, much wider scale later on. So anyway, that's kind of the other interpretation. This section 113, is very useful, and we're going to continue to use it for this chapter. Anyway, we'll jump back to the text, and then I'll jump back to section 113 as that becomes relevant again. So now as we continue with verse 10, it says, "And in that day there shall be a root of Jesse." Remember we're talking about, a branch shall grow out, and then you'll have another little tree that grows out of the root. So in that day there shall be a root of Jesse, which shall stand for an ensign of the people. To it shall the Gentiles seek, and his rest shall be glorious. It shall come to pass in that day, the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people which shall be left, from Assyria, and from Egypt, and from Pathros, and from Cush, and from Elam, and from Shinar, and from Hamath, and from the islands of the sea. And he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. The envy of Ephraim also shall depart, and the adversaries of Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and Judah shall not vex Ephraim. But they shall fly upon the shoulders of the Philistines toward the west. They shall spoil them of the east together. They shall lay their hand upon Edom and Moab. The children of Ammon shall obey them. And the Lord shall utterly destroy the tongue of the Egyptian sea. And with his mighty wind shall he shake his hand over the river, and shall smite it in the seven streams, and make men go over dry shod. And there shall be a highway for the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria, like as it was to Israel in the day that he came up out of the land of Egypt. Now, here it's talking about in that day. A lot of times Isaiah will be talking about his own time and at the same time allude to a later day. But here when he says in that day, I think it's pretty clear he's talking about the last days. I think it's pretty clear that he's talking about the last days. But you have to remember why. Why is he doing that? Why is he invoking this imagery of the last days when he's trying to talk King Ahaz out of not siding with the Assyrians? And I think that it's pretty clear when you look at it that he's trying to say, listen, don't rely on the Assyrians for help. Rely on the Lord. The Lord's going to save you. Look at all this great stuff the Lord is going to do. Even if things go badly, the Lord is still going to do all this great stuff for you guys. So don't side with the Assyrians. Side with God. And so I think that's really what we're looking at here. And that day there shall be a root of Jesse which shall stand for an ensign of the people. So, a branch shall grow out of the root, which we talked about earlier. But the root itself will stand, almost like the root grows out of the ground or something. It'll grow up for an ensign of the people. And to it shall the Gentiles seek, and his rest shall be glorious. Ensign is like a big banner. It's like a big banner that you would maybe rally to in wartime, kind of a thing, or sort of a national banner that you could sort of rally around. So, and he says that the Gentiles will rally to this banner. It says, and his rest shall be glorious. Um, so probably meaning his rest, this root of Jesse. The Gentiles are going to rally to him like a banner, and his rest will be glorious. He's. I think the impression when I look at the way this is used in other parts of Isaiah, almost like somebody who dies in office as like a king or something like that, and he's sort of put in state. That's actually what it looks like to me, sort of a royal reception. That's what it looks like to me. So, and in that day, and excuse me, it shall come to pass in that day, the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people which shall be left from Assyria, and from Egypt, and from Pathros, and from Cush, and Elam, and Shinar, and Hamat, and the islands of the sea. So God's going to recover his people that have been scattered everywhere. But what does this mean? Seems a little bit odd. Why is he listing all these countries? Well, it's because he's invoking what to them are the four corners of the earth. So from Judah, by the way, we're going to have some maps here, so you can look at this on the video anyway, or later you can pull up a map and look at this. But Assyria, the Assyrian Empire, is kind of part of Syria, part of kind of northwest Iraq, part of kind of east Syria today. That's Assyria, so that's to the north. Okay, they're kind of the big neighbor to the north, honestly. At this point, they're each been absorbing probably a lot of Syria. Okay, and then they're going to come from Egypt down south, and from Pathros and Cush. Pathros is probably the north part of Egypt. Cush is a little bit south of Egypt. So Egypt, and then even farther south. So he's got north and south covered. Okay, as far as his four corners of his very small earth at the time. They don't really know too much outside of this little area, frankly. And from Elam, so Elam is now in Iran. It's kind of southwestern Iran, so now he's going east. And from Shinar, slightly less east, probably Babylonish area. Well, yeah, kind of over there. So in the east, and then from Hamath, which is kind of northwest of Jerusalem, and kind of a last stop in some ways before you go out to the sea, and that's the last thing, from the islands of the sea into the Mediterranean. So north, south, east, and west. And it says he's going to set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people which shall be left. So he's going to kind of gather them in, like one would sort of gather something in with his hands. Although this is a very interesting example of double coding, and we're going to get to that in just a second at the end of the discussion today. So he's going to gather them in from the four corners of the earth. He shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. You have to remember, in Isaiah's time, when the Assyrians come in, they take out a lot of Judah, and they export the inhabitants hither and yon, right? So this is about to be incredibly relevant for Isaiah. These guys are going to get shipped everywhere by the Assyrians. And so Isaiah is saying, but they're going to be gathered back in. Because the Assyrians, they don't take Jerusalem, but they take a lot of other cities, and they export a lot of people. They leave some around, but they send a lot of people away as captives. So for Isaiah to be thinking about this, it makes a lot of sense. The envy of Judah, of Ephraim, also shall depart, and the adversary, or probably the adversity, the sort of mean-spiritedness of Judah shall be cut off. So finally, northern and southern Israel, Ephraim and Judah, are finally get along. Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and Judah shall not vex Ephraim. They'll finally get along with each other. And then it says, but they shall fly upon the shoulders of the Philistines. I would say they will attack the flanks of the Philistines towards the west. And you look at a map, the Philistia is just west of Israel and Judah. So they together are going to attack the Philistines, and they'll spoil them of the east together. Then they'll go east to attack the people out in what is today Jordan. They shall lay their hand upon Edom and Moab out there in the desert, and the children of Ammon shall obey them. Because remember, east of the Jordan, the countries spell the word same: Syria, Ammon, Moab, Edom. So they're going to go out and they're going to take out all these countries out in the desert and into what today is Jordan. So not only are they going to gather everybody from the four corners of the earth, but they are going to go out to the, in a smaller way to the four corners of the earth and occupy everything. Going to go west and east and get together. North and south are going to get together, and then they're going to occupy east and west on a smaller scale. And the Lord shall utterly destroy the tongue of the Egyptian sea. And you go, what are you talking about, Isaiah? So when the children of Israel crossed the Red Sea, you guys remember this parting of the Red Sea? It's a pretty standard classic story. That's actually the Reed Sea. It's a little piece. It's hard to know exactly where this is. It does. You know how the Red Sea kind of has two forks? It seems like the top of one of those forks used to be a big marshy area called the Reed Sea, and that is what it looks like Moses parts to take the children of Israel into the Promised Land. That's at least, there are some theories about that, but that's what looks most obvious to me. So he parts that so they can go through into the Promised Land. And so when he says he's utterly going to destroy the tongue of the Egyptian sea, I think this is an allusion to that event. Just like when he was taking the children of Israel out of Egypt and he had dried up the Reed Sea, which is that very, very northernmost marshy annex of the Red Sea, he's going to do the same thing again. And with his mighty wind shall he shake his hand over the river. Okay, so he's going to do that on the one thing. And so you remember, though, that how does he do it? He does it with a big wind, right? There are multiple kind of strains of that story within Exodus, but it seems like he has a wind that blows, and that's kind of how he does it, right? And so then, in the very next part of the verse, it says, and with his mighty wind shall he shake his hands over the river. So what is the river? That usually when it says the river, that means the Euphrates, okay? So when he gathers the people, he's going to destroy the tongue of the Egyptian sea, just like he did before, dry up that part of the Reed Sea so the children of Israel can come back. But he's also, with his mighty wind, he's going to shake his hand over the river, over the Euphrates, just like when he parted the Red Sea before. He's going to do the same thing to the Euphrates, and he's going to smite it into 7 streams. So he's going to break it into 7 pieces, so it becomes a silly little stream that you can walk over without getting your feet wet, right? That's what it says in the next part of the verse. And make men go over dry shod. They can just go over in their shoes and not even get their feet wet, walking over this namby-pamby little stream that's now broken. Used to be the river, now it's broken into 7 little pieces, and they can just mosey across. And there shall be a highway for the remnant of his people which shall be left from Assyria, like it was to Israel in the day that he came up out of the land of Egypt. So he's going to sort of part the Euphrates and make it easy for everybody to come back, just like he parted the Red Sea and had people come up out of Egypt. So that's what we're looking at in this chapter. Sort of this idea of, even if things go bad and everybody gets scattered, God's still going to allow for everybody to come back. So why are you so worried about this? Why don't you trust me? Don't trust the Assyrians. Trust me. I'm going to take care of you. But there are some more interesting things. And once again, I think Isaiah knows that the Ahaz isn't his only audience. I think he knows that other people are going to be observing this. And this is a very public place. So he throws in little allusions to future events for people that are going to pick up what he's putting down. So let's go back to section 113 and talk about some of those things. So here in section 113, we see some kind of interesting things. Verse 3, it says, what is the rod spoken of in the first verse of the 11th chapter of Isaiah that should come from the stem of Jesse? Well, thus saith the Lord, it is a servant in the hands of Christ, who is partly a descendant of Jesse, as well as of Ephraim, or of the house of Joseph, on whom there is laid much power. I am not sure if we know who this person is. We may, but I'm not sure if we actually know who this person is. Well, in fact, I don't know if we know who a lot of these people are, but there's some stuff that makes me think that one of these people, maybe the one in verse 4, maybe the one in verse 6 of section 113, is Joseph Smith. So verse 5 it says, "What is the root of Jesse spoken of in the 10th verse of the 11th chapter? Behold, thus saith the Lord, it is a descendant of Jesse as well as of Joseph, unto whom rightly belongs the priesthood and the keys of the kingdom for an ensign, and for the gathering of my people in the last days." Now, the one in verse 4 is descendant of Jesse and Ephraim, on whom there is laid much power. It's not very descriptive, but in 6, descendant of Jesse as well as Joseph, unto whom rightly belongs the priesthood and the keys of the kingdom, for an ensign and for the gathering of my people in the last days. Well, who's a descendant of Joseph who gets the priesthood and the keys of the kingdom and initiates the last days gathering? Well, to me that looks like Joseph Smith. And I think that Isaiah may support that. Now, once again, in Isaiah's time, he doesn't want to raise too many eyebrows. I think, yeah, he's talking about the last days, but it's stuff that wouldn't necessarily be too disturbing to people. People in Ahaz's time can interpret that as coming fairly soon, but Isaiah knows, no, this is going to be a long time in the future. But let's look at this again. So he's going to gather these people from all these different places. In that day there shall be a root of Jesse, which shall stand for an ensign to the people. To it shall the Gentiles seek, and his arrest shall be glorious. And when we look at the root, this is what it's in verse 6 of section 113. Looks suspiciously like it might be Joseph Smith. And when you look at the Isaiah in Hebrew, that does seem to be the case. So 2 Nephi 21:11, Isaiah 11:11 says, "And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people which shall be left." Or, this may be a pun. You can also read it this way. "And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord," this is not the Lord as in Jehovah, which they often change to Lord. This is just actually my Lord. And that's, a respectful title for someone who's in a position of authority. "It shall come to pass in that day that my Lord," so someone in a position of authority, "my Lord Joseph," or we would say Mr. Joseph, "shall come to pass in that day that Mr. Joseph shall fold his hand or close his hand to recover the remnant of his people which shall be left." So both work, I think. So set his hand again the second time, though. It's a little bit awkward that way, but works fine. The Lord set his hand again the second time. Those are two different words. It seems a little repetitive, but you're like, okay, whatever. To recover the remnant of his people which shall be left. But also it could be, shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall, it shall come to pass in that day that my Lord Joseph shall fold his hand to recover the remnant of his people which shall be left. As though he were gathering people in. So it really depends on how you interpret that verse, and I think it's meant to be read in both ways. Isaiah, like I said, doesn't want to raise too many eyebrows, but it's just awkward enough that people who are up on the book of Moses, you have to remember the Joseph was now Joseph Smith translation at the end of Genesis, which pretty clearly identified Joseph Smith. These people probably would have had that, and so at least a handful of them would have been up on this and would have gone, hey, Joseph, and it shall come to pass that in that day that Mr. Joseph will set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people which shall be left, right? They probably would have picked up on that and gone, oh, the gathering, right? The last day's gathering. And so he'll set up an ensign to the nations and gather the outcasts of Israel. So for now, not just talking about the Assyrians taking people away, this is much, much later, after the house of Israel have literally been scattered to the four corners of the earth, from Norway to New Zealand, right? Really all over the map, right? And gathering these people in. And then you can see how he may be talking about the last days. and how the gathering is going to be like the Exodus out of Egypt. And once again, Isaiah is good every time. He's good for a lot of time periods. A lot of different groups of people just love him to death. I love him to death. And just like we've been talking about last days gathering of Israel, even at the time of Jesus, there are some very suggestive things in this chapter. So let's look at Acts 15. Acts 15 is the conference. You guys may remember this. This is the conference. They're trying to figure out what to do about the Gentiles. Do we just let the Gentiles into the church? If they have to be circumcised, kind of go into the church via Judaism. What do we do? So I think this is James. This is Acts 15, 16 through 18. And James gets up to read. And he says, and to this agree the words of the prophets as it is written, after this I will return and will build again the tabernacle of David which is fallen down. And I will build again the ruins thereof, and I will set it up, that the residue of men might seek after the Lord, and all the Gentiles upon whom my name is called, saith the Lord, who doeth all these things. Known unto God are all his works from the beginning of the world. And he uses this scripture as a justification. Yes, we should allow the Gentiles into the church. Don't worry about circumcision, just let them come. Now this verse comes from later in the Old Testament, but it's translated differently. It's pretty clear James is using the Septuagint version, which seems like it might be a mistake. In the normal version it says, and I will build again the ruins thereof, and I will set it up. Build again the tabernacle of David which is fallen down. I will build again the ruins thereof, and I will set it up, that they may possess the remnant of Edom. But here he uses a completely different version. However, this word residue here would be the word in Hebrew that we see in Isaiah when it's specifically talking about gathering in the Gentiles. That the Gentiles will seek after the Lord. That's what we see here in Isaiah 21. And so, when the ensign is raised, to it will the Gentiles seek, and his rest shall be glorious. That word seek is that same word. It's the what gets translated into the Greek version that you think James might be using the wrong version. Well, it would be this word. The residue of men might seek the Lord. That word seek is the same as it is in Isaiah. And so, all that to say that this verse, why are they choosing this verse to talk about the Gentiles coming into the church? Well, because Isaiah has been talking about the Gentiles coming into the church in Isaiah 11. And so they use this scripture from another part of the Old Testament. When they have to decide on whether they use the Greek version or the standard Hebrew version, they go with the Greek version. Why? Because it jives with this chapter in Isaiah talking about the Gentiles coming into the church. So this is one example where we see that the New Testament version of quoting from the Old Testament, they've really considered what they're talking about. And so I think that this is very interesting. We see Isaiah being applied. This is Isaiah being applied indirectly through another verse of the Old Testament. But we see Isaiah being applied in sort of the last days. We see Isaiah being applied in his own time. And we see Isaiah here being applied in the New Testament as a justification for subtle difference in wording here in Acts 15. So I think that's one of the great things about Isaiah, is that it can be applied to so many different times. It's good to know, Isaiah is talking about his own time. He's talking about events that are very shortly to come to pass. But he's also talking about the last days. And this idea, we have all these national sort of fights that we have. We have all this animosity between countries and little tiffs about things, and we have a lot of strife within our own countries. But Isaiah sees this time where what's the only thing that's going to solve that? Isaiah sees a time where that's going to stop, and it's going to stop because the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. When everybody knows about the Lord, all these funny ideological differences that we have are not going to be a problem. these nations that have always traditionally been at war are going to be like happy little animals in the Garden of Eden with the lamb and the lion hanging out together. These differences that we put between each other can really only be bridged by the gospel. Jesus is the only one that can bridge the huge, huge gaps that divide us all, those of other nations, and even those in our own country that we feel are kind of different than us. Christ is the only one that can bridge those gaps, and I think that's what Isaiah is saying here, is that not only can he do that, but when everybody knows about the Lord, that is exactly what's going to happen. But anyway, I think that's it for today. We're just going to keep on keeping on, I think, with this speech next time. But anyway, we will see you guys next time.